We will commence our lecture on gravity with the perihelion advance of planets. This is where Newton's gravitational theory and mathematics failed completely with the planet Mercury, and Einstein achieved instant fame with his calculation of the perihelion advance of Mercury. There is the table of the perihelion advance of the first 3 planets. As you can see, the observed or accepted advance is Mercury's 43.1 arcseconds, Venus's 8.4 arcseconds, and Earth's 5.0 arcseconds. Einstein's enormous claim to fame and acceptance of his theory of relativity is at Mercury, where, using approximations, he was able to calculate the perihelion advance to 43.0 arcseconds. But as you can see, Einstein and his general relativity also failed with his calculation of Venus of 8.6 arcseconds instead of 8.4, and the very dismal 3.8 arcseconds for Earth instead of 5.0. In our Hashem science and E equals mv squared, we don't do approximations. Every calculation is to minimum 9 decimal places. So let us see what our science says about the perihelion advance of planets. We start with Mercury. Please note that all the data we use here, mass, velocity, radius, solar irradiance, etc. of each planet, was obtained from the NASA website. The only data we supply ourselves is the energy absorption rate of the planets which we derived ourselves. We'll justify the calculation of it later. I believe all the figures there are self-explanatory. Over here, the reason why we divide the surface area of the planet by 2 is because the sun shines on only half the planet at any given time. And we are talking about a time frame of only minutes. Multiply up all the numbers and you have there the total amount of solar energy Mercury absorbs from the sun at perihelion. And Vs there is the amount of additional velocity this amount of solar energy gives Mercury. And there is our Hashem mass-to-motion effects equations, which we use to determine the extent to which a planet will lose mass, contract as a result of its increasing its velocity from the minimum slowest velocity to the mean velocity it attains and surpasses as perihelion approaches. As explained in this book, all objects in the universe, except man-made ones, are structured to lose mass in order to increase their velocity and to gain mass in order to reduce their velocity. That's how planets are able to go from a mean velocity to a slower minimum velocity and then on to a faster maximum velocity. This way, the law of conservation of energy is maintained. Our mass contraction theory needs further elaboration. Since Newton held all mass to be constant, while Einstein proposed, with E equals mc squared, that the mass of objects expands with increasing velocity but does not contract. Hashem science, with the equivalence of energy and motion, says that the faster objects like planets go, the more their mass initially contracts, shrinks, in accordance with this formula. Although Einstein did not believe in mass contraction, he did believe in length contraction and devised an equation for length contraction. Please refer back to the section entitled Contradictions of Einstein and confirmation that Einstein is wrong and Hashem science correct. So we can be certain that the mass of planets and other objects do contract with increasing velocity, as we have outlined here, and that length contraction is part of this mass contraction in reality. Going back to Mercury and the diagrammatic representation of its position, what we have there is the new contracted mass of Mercury as a result of the increase in its velocity from minimum to mean velocity, followed by its increase in velocity generated in turn by the contraction in mass. Now, using the cosine formula to get the overall effect of the additional velocity the sunlight energy adds to Mercury's final velocity, we notice that it is too small to be significant. So we go on to the sine formula to calculate the shift in Mercury's position and find that the perihelion advance of Mercury per Earth century, according to Hashem science and E equals mv squared, is exactly 43.100094446 arc seconds, exactly as observed and no approximation. We are now going to use our Hashem orbits unification science equations, which unify all of physics from gravity to electromagnetism to nuclear forces, to calculate the perihelion distances of these three planets. In doing so, we will be using the same planetary sunlight energy absorption conversion rates as well as the solar irradiance data used in the perihelion advance calculations for all three planets. It is a principle of our Hashem science that all objects in the universe orbit around 10 primary orbital geographical positions, each of which is described by a variation of the same Hashem orbits unification science equations. What you see now is the equations for the lower east position of all orbits, which is where all planets at perihelion execute their perihelion advance. The lower east equation states that the square of the distance between the primary body, i.e. the sun, and the secondary body, the planet, is equal to the following. The Hashem resistant heat constant multiplied by the light energy radiated by the sun, which itself is calculated in accordance with E equals mv squared, multiplied again by the speed of light c, and multiplied by the maximum velocity of the sun divided by the maximum velocity of the planet minus 1, and all to the power of 7.07. The total value is then divided by the value you get when you multiply the mass of the planet by the speed of light squared, and multiplied again by the time it takes the planet to absorb sunlight energy at perihelion, which is the same value you met in the perihelion advance calculations, and finally multiplied by Newton's gravitational constant, 6.67 times 10 to the negative 11th Newton meter squared per kilogram squared, which I have renamed the Hashem gravitational force constant factor. The mass and maximum velocity of the sun, like all other data, was obtained from the NASA website. And naturally, you get the total light energy radiated by the sun, not what a planet receives, but what the sun itself produces, by using our E equals mv squared equation, which gives you the total sun energy output you see. The symbols H sub A J and J sub A H you see are all your normal joules, but with the addition of the word Hashem. There you see again Mercury's time for absorbing the solar irradiance it gets. So now we see the calculation of Mercury's perihelion distance from the sun with all the numbers and units in place. The result, 4.6 times 10 to the 10th meters, is exactly as observed and measured by scientists. Mercury is 4.6 times 10 to the 10th meters from the sun at perihelion.